Hi, welcome to Just Enough Scala for Spark, Section 1, the very beginning. Let's get into it. Let's make this interesting, challenging, and interactive, shall we? Let's use Scala, of course. Let's use IntelliJ. Let's use SBT, and let's have the end goal of using Scala with Spark all in mind. What's the objective of these screencasts is to make you proficient in writing Spark applications with Spark. And we're going to do that by introducing you to what I believe are just the most important aspects of Scala so you can use it with Apache Spark. How are we going to do that? I'm going to present to you some of the key concepts. We're going to go over some hands-on exercises. And I'm going to provide recommendations and references to you if you'd like to follow up in some different topics. I'm also going to listen. You know, if you've got a question, if you've got comments, wherever you're watching this video, just go ahead and ask them, and then I will do my best to answer them. Okay? This section overview, we're going to go over a Scala background. We're going to set up, and we're going to talk about and set up your environment. This includes Scala, IntelliJ, and the source code examples. And then we're going to begin our tour of Scala with some of the key language elements. Finally, we're going to talk about classes, inheritance, and traits. There's going to be tons of examples here, folks. So here we go. First, a little background on Scala, a little perspective. What is Scala? And this is from the marketing department. It's where object-oriented meets functional. So it's an attempt to have the best of both worlds, of both the object-oriented paradigm as well as the functional paradigm. You'll see Scala code out there that is highly functional, and you'll see Scala code that looks a lot like Java. That's very object-oriented. What is the best way? Well, probably the best way is the ones you feel most comfortable with, and your styles will probably change over time. You can learn more about Scala at the scala-lang.org site here at the bottom. I guess I flipped that slide a little too fast, but it's scala-lang.org. Also, you might hear people refer to it as Scala because of origins and trying to develop a scalable language. And if you hear that, that's fine. Let people say Scala if they want. I'm going to refer to it in these screencasts as Scala because that's the way I most hear it described in my adventures. So that's what we're going to do. If you want to call it Scala, fine. You call it Scala, all right? But I'm going to call it Scala. Why Scala? Well, type safety. We're going to let the compiler do a lot of the work for us. How do you feel about compilers? How do you feel about static typing? I'm not going to get into whether I think it's great or not. Scala just is a type-safe language, and that's what it is. And if we want to talk about loose type versus strong type, let's do that someplace else. Scala is expressive. Everything can be, and functions are first class, and you'll see what I mean by that in a minute. It's concise. When you compare it to Java, which most people do, Java will seem much more verbose than Scala. But you don't have to ditch Java entirely. We can still use some of our tried and true Java libraries in our code. So for somebody like me that came to Scala from Java and some of my favorite libraries, I can still use them in Scala if I want. So it's nice that I can build upon what I already had. And you can too. There's plenty of great third-party libraries out there that are in use all over, including within Spark. So the history of Scala is that it was started in 2001 by a man so much smarter than me named Martin Ordesky. It was in the EPFL, which is located in Switzerland. And it's the follow-on work from a language called Funnel, which has ideas in functional programming and Petri nets. What are Petri nets? I have no idea. But we can look that up if you want. More about Martin can be seen here at this Wikipedia. And you're probably already familiar with him and some of his work and some of his great screencasts and his contributions to the community. So how Scala? Scala compiles down to Java bytecode, which means this works with standard JVMs. We're going to focus on using compatibility of Java 1.8 in these screencasts. And we're going to also talk about, I feel like there was a slide missing here. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about Scala versions as well, but for now, just know that Scala is, we're going to focus on Java 1.8. So when we talk about that, we'll talk about your environment setup. So, wow, that's a great segue into your environment setup. Let's talk about what you need to download to set up your environment. And some of this you may already have set up, so just skip it if you do. First, I've provided a GitHub repo for you to download, and that includes an example of IntelliJ setup files and SBT, which we'll use in the upcoming screencast. So you can download that here, and I will say that is here. I include a link for you here, GitHub, but also to show you too that if you go to GitHub and then Scala for Spark, this is a public repo. And you'll see this build SBT file, or hopefully you see that here highlighted, and then the setup, which we'll go into in a bit. But if you click on the clone or download, if you don't have GitHub set up, you can just hit this download zip and it will do it all for you. So that's what this link is here, this master zip. And if you go over here and click this download zip. So do that first. Download it and put it in a directory. Open it and expand it. For example, I'll just do this now. If I show it in Finder here, this will work on a Windows box or a Linux box too. If you're taking these screencasts and you're not able to unzip files, you're probably in the wrong spot. So if you download this zip file and then just expand it, you'll see then you have this directory all set for you. And we'll be going over that later on. So download that and expand it in your directory of choice. I usually put this, and you'll see this later screencasts later in the program in a directory called development. So do that. Download this. It's a quick download. Next, do you have IntelliJ installed? And if you do, great. And if you don't, let's go through that quickly. I'm going to Google IntelliJ. We'll come up with JetBrains, the makers of IntelliJ, and I'm going to click on the download section. There's a community version, which is free, and everything that we're going to be doing here, and even everything I do in my normal everyday work life, is the community version is fine. So we're going to download that and use that in the screencast. You hit the download button, and it begins asking you for anything or join their mailing list or anything like that. You'll see here, maybe hopefully in this corner, you see it down in the lower part of the screen here. I'm downloading a DMG file, which says that I'm on a Mac. If you download a Windows file, it will download something appropriate for your OS. So don't worry about that. If you see this DMG file and wondering if you're on Windows, if it'll work, just go ahead and do that. And the browser should be, the code on the server side of this website should be smart enough to determine what OS that you're using. Okay, so that's quite a big download that we'll take a look at later on. And let's see what's next here. Yeah, I guess I already talked to you about, hey, downloading IntelliJ. Also, if you don't have Java installed, you'll want to install that. And as I mentioned before, it's going to be Java 8. You can click on this link, and it will take you there, or it should take you there. Let's go over this. Again, we can download it for your appropriate environment. I'm going to show you, though, if I have a terminal open here. You'll want to check this first. You might even already have Java installed. So just go out to a command line or a command prompt if you're on Windows. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about there, this may not be the appropriate screencast for you. I assume that you know what I'm talking about there. So open up a terminal and you can just type in Java version, and you can see that I have Java 8.1.8 already installed. So if you've got Java 1.8 already installed, that should be good. If it's OpenJDK versus Oracle, we're not really going to talk about that here. I just want to get you started. So if you've got 1.8 installed, great. You'll be ready to install IntelliJ. And if you already have IntelliJ installed, you can skip. I think that's the next section. We're going to go over IntelliJ. You can download Scala if you want to. Again, primarily in this course, we're going to be talking about using IntelliJ, which will download the appropriate Scala for you, and we'll go over how to configure that. But if you want to use Scala outside of IntelliJ, go ahead, do it if you want. The version we're going to be using is Scala 2.11 throughout these screencasts, because that's what is appropriate for Spark 2. So, and that's the latest version of Spark at this time. So if I were you and you want to use Scala outside of IntelliJ, download 2.11. So if you click that, it will bring you to the download, and you'll see all these different versions, but hopefully you'll see that I'm recommending 2.11. I just grabbed the latest 2.11, so 2.11.11 at this time, but if it's 2.11.12 at the time, or 2.11.13 when you're watching this, go ahead and do that. Any one of these 2.11s will be fine for these screencasts. All right, so I'm going to check if you got Java installed. I'm going to download the source from my GitHub repo, possibly IntelliJ if you haven't. And then and if you want, as a bonus, you can download Scala as well and install it on your machine. So why don't you do that now, and then we'll pick up in the next video. We'll talk about putting all this together. So go ahead and do that before you move on to the next screencast.